I'm just going to sweep. Cool. So I guess before we dive into it, I sent everyone sort of that template message just to give everyone some food for thought. So you could sort of, I guess, maybe really think about a few questions that you could bring to the table. And I think one thing to be mindful of, which I sort of say at all the men's circles that we run, we've got 6 guys on this call now, which means there's 6 different lived experiences, perspectives, and belief systems on here, which, I respect every single one of your belief systems to date. And I'm excited to learn more about what, the topic of toxic masculinity means to you, and sort of what's influenced you to come to that, and sort of how you even perceive it. Because it's, when I was answering these questions for myself, I was like, fuck, I just put myself on the spot here, because it made me think a little bit more, which was fun. But, as a result, I don't believe, and I don't want to utilize this as a solution. I think it's a way that we can seek to understand. I think, if we can come from a place of understanding, it's always helpful to, it's always helpful to, I guess, progress in a way that, provides, understanding. But I think, one thing for those, has anyone watched the Social Dilemma or whatever it's called? It pointed out a really cool thing where it was like, we're not supposed to be judged and compared to billions of people, which, social media gives us access to. We're used to being in little villages where everyone has their role, and every village has their own way of being, which is, as they sort of say, the way of being in that village is the right way of being to them, based on how they've, done it for decades and decades. Whereas now, the way I've grown up is being criticized, and, all of us, everything we all do is being criticized by fucking someone somewhere, right? But I think why we do the things we do, we think the way we think and act, is based upon our environments and our experiences to date. So this conversation is progressive. Let's seek to understand where everyone's coming from. Some of you may say things that piss me off, vice versa, which is all cool, right? We're all entitled to have this conversation, but please be respectful. Please, seek to understand. Just don't cut people off. Let, whoever's talking get what they need to get out, and share their opinion, because they might be about to say the one thing you're sort of asking the question. Sound cool? We will be also respectful of time. Try and keep this to 6:45, 7 in Queensland. I don't know if you're in daylight savings, or George, I don't know what time it is in the UK, mate, but looks early for the cuppa, mate. So let's dive in. I guess I'll start if you want, and how the format will go, and then we'll just engage in a discussion from each person. If you want to ask questions, I think there's a hands up button on here, is there? Maybe. Yeah, there's a reaction. You can hit the reaction and maybe hit the thumbs up button if you want to interject, or even just write something in the chat. Yeah, Pat's got it. He's nailed it. He already wants to talk, do you? That can be a signal for, when whoever finishes speaking can dive in. But the 3 questions was to understand, what toxic masculinity means to you. What do you feel we can do to move the conversation forward and create, change in the space? And have you sort of changed who you are and your behaviors as a result of sort of being engaged in more of these conversations? So I'll quickly fly through mine, and if you guys want to ask questions or talk, otherwise we'll work our way through. But for me, when I had to think about it a bit more, I sort of went back to how I first understood it as it became a thing off the back of the Gillette ad. I think the Gillette ad for me was really the first time people kept asking my opinion of it. I'd never really delved into it too much, or even understood too much about what toxic masculinity was. But the more I sort of looked into it, and, Jordan Peterson, all these people have their own spins on it. It was generalized toxic behavior. So I perceived it and I interpreted it in a way that a lot of masculine or male behaviors were considered toxic, right? Such as womanizing, which I've been guilty of. The boys will be boys sort of mentality. Once again, I've been very, very guilty of that, coming from a rugby background, and also that harden up sort of culture. So for me, when I guess I'm even looking for it, right? We look for things to validate our perception or our belief around it. They're the sort of things that I am focused on finding to support my own belief around what toxic masculinity really is. And I feel having conversations like this, is the way we sort of progress the understanding of what it is. Like I said, I don't think there'll ever be a solution because there's too many opinions and experiences to this day. But I think, conversations to seek to understand where everyone's at and what it really means to people can help open our own eyes to what's going and potentially change our own views on what it is. So I'm excited for that. And yeah, I'm definitely changing my behaviors. I've probably been doing that since before, toxic masculinity was really a term. I think some of the toxic masculine behaviors that I guess have been brought to light, I've been guilty of all of them. And I'm not saying I'm perfect. I'm still consciously working at being a better person, but I've had 25 years of conditioning to that point that made me think and act and behave in certain ways, which I'm trying to be aware of. So that's me. If any conversation, otherwise we'll pass it on, and I'll just go around the sort of screen on my end, which will lead with Sean. On the spot, mate. First in.
First up, there you go. Cool. So what does toxic masculinity mean to me? My view of it is that of masculinity, you've got your behaviors, right? So, and the toxic masculinity is the negative or harmful aspects of that behavior manifesting in your actions or your thoughts or your ideas. So I think that for every probably aspect of masculinity that you would talk to, there can be a good and a bad. And I think the toxic is the ones that are bad. Generally, I also think it comes out when as kind of like a default setting or kind of like a bad cultural setting if we don't actually acknowledge it and be aware of it. Things like womanizing could be an example where I think being masculine is a part of masculinity is trying to talk to women. Whereas then if we don't teach boys how to talk to women, then it'll become generally will default to the toxic part of just, almost acting like they're one of the boys. And kind of, so not talking to them on the level as a female. Whereas then the wholesome masculinity of that is, respect, appreciation, all these things that you change your behavior because you are talking to a female. So yeah, that's where I think toxic masculinity is the toxic part of each of the masculine behaviors. What do you think needs to happen is discussion. Just really these discussions. I think these discussions in this group, these discussions in groups that disagree with us, not to tell them what to do, but to give them open eyes. So men's rights activist groups, even to the opposite side of ones that are just very like they think that all masculinity is toxic masculinity, those types of guys groups and females. I just think, through groups showing to females just breaks down those barriers so it can evolve. And have I changed my behavior to create a positive ripple effect? Lockie, it's exactly why I started my Instagram page was to address this type of issue. I felt that toxic masculinity was being spoken about not by guys or not by people that are in this circle. And so I think, we just need more of talking about it more. And then, I changed my behavior to then showcase wholesome people and the good ways to do it and the good mindset and the good discussions around it.
Epic. Does anyone have any questions or anything you want to interject?
Just something I'm wondering. So it's been mentioned a couple of times already is the womanizing part of it. So a thing with me, I'm very sure on the other foot. So when someone talks about toxic masculinity, I think about it, okay, well, would that be associated with toxicity had it have been someone from another gender that did that same thing? So if we say that womanizing is toxic masculinity, then is a woman that does has the same, and engages in the same sort of behaviour, is she toxic as well, or is she just sort of empowered?
I think I'll speak first. And my understanding, when you look at masculine and feminine, it's an energy, and we all possess both the masculine and the feminine. Potentially when you're looking at it from taking control in a relationship or in a intimate situation, you're more in your masculine essence, and generally the polarity would lead to one person being more masculine and the other person being more feminine. It doesn't necessarily mean the male has to be more masculine. The female could be more masculine. So I think with that, the behavior works both ways, right? Like I wouldn't consider.
So would you say that toxic masculinity could be somewhat associated with assertiveness or over assertiveness?
Yeah, I think exactly what you're saying, and this is why I like the feminine masculine energy, because of I think you touched too that when women are doing it, it seems to be like empowerment and everything like that. I get that, whereas the discussion is that my view that if the woman's been that harassing, that kind of like catcalling, that wolf whistling to a tradie or to something like that, then she's doing toxic masculine behaviors. Whereas, so 100% that's my view, is that, the masculine behavior is the kind of the more aggressive or the more pursuing. The toxic is how they do that. And I think if women, the irony is that women probably do see that as empowering, and they just do do the same habits that they would then call toxic masculinity if it was a guy doing it.
Yeah, so, it seems as though like this day and age, it's all about the gate swinging back the other way. Like everyone's anti everything, and like fair enough. Up through probably the 60s and the 70s or whatever, it was very white male, cisgendered, top down approach. Like we were the bullies, and then. So now it seems as though anyone that engages in the same behaviour but that don't belong to the white male cisgendered group, it's like, oh, well, good on you, you're getting your own back. But it's like, that's still the same behaviour. It still needs to be termed the same. And like, for how many years does that happen? Let's say for the next 10 years, they say, okay, well, it's open slather on everyone, just do whatever the white male did to you. But then after the 10 years, when do they look back and they go, well, actually, we did exactly the same thing back, so now it's time to stop. And if you're just labelling that behaviour, I think like that's where I really need to seek to understand is, I don't know what behaviour is toxic. Does toxic necessarily mean like contagious, or does it mean, you think about toxic, it means like it's going to break down something? Is it going to break down masculinity somehow, or is it going to increase masculinity over assertiveness, aggressiveness? What do the terms mean?
That is a fucking great question, and anyone who's listening to this replay after, swing all of us a message, because I think from once again, I'd love Dan, George, Tommy, Shep, Brad, you guys to jump in and get engaged. We will get around to everyone. But I guess, what it looks like to you, because it could be, I think that's the point, right? We don't know where it stops, because everyone's own experiences based around, what they link pain to and what they link pleasure to could probably, would maybe determine what toxic may be. Whereas for some people, it may be just everyday life. You think about people who grow up in America that are used to gang violence, they become conditioned to that, right? They're not aware of what that is, right? Whereas, for me, watching that stuff on TV, I'm like, fuck me, that's why, like, I don't want to be involved in that. And the same maybe for me, full well, when I was, lying, cheating, manipulating, being aggressive and trying to be the lad at the pub, like that was normal for me growing up, which is fucking crazy. But that I didn't see that as bad until I sort of got an outside, objective view. So I'd love to hear from anyone else as well.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind jumping in there. I can probably answer my questions and maybe speak to a little bit of my thoughts on what Pat just shared. So toxic masculinity to me is, I guess, those traditional masculine concepts that are celebrated or encouraged or permitted that cause, I guess, harm or disempower other people. And I think that's at its core just when we had the conversation online on Facebook the other day, and then I noticed a lot of things kept coming up around, you know, all sorts of things, and I've really reflected on during the week that there's whether it's females can show those same traits or whatever the case may be. You know, for so long we talk about sort of about white cisgender males, and when does that stop and when does it start? I feel like we talked about, let's say, the 60s and 70s. I look back at, you know, hundreds of years, just the natural benefit that was bestowed upon, generally speaking, of course, of people who fit the category you spoke about, Pat. And so I think that in terms of where do we draw that line and where do we rectify, and when do those 10 years pass and say, well, actually, I've been doing those same things all along, I just think, well, all we can do is look inward to address what we're doing and worry less about what society's, what can you do to be a better man? What can you do to play your part, that when a woman speaks to you or another man speaks to you, that you project masculinity in its most positive, most enriching form that celebrates what it is to be a man, that doesn't come at the expense of anyone else. And I feel like that should be the center of the chat, regardless of. I feel like the talking about race, sexuality, that kind of thing, I feel like that is definitely has parts of the argument or parts of the conversation, but I feel at its core, it's about men just saying, let's just do better. And what do we accept? And what conversations do you accept of your mates and your brothers and your dad and your sons, the way they talk about women, the way they talk about other men who aren't as overtly masculine, the way they talk about gay guys or transgender people, things like that. Like those conversations, to me, that's what's toxic, and that's what breeds generation to generation. And chats like this, question 2, exactly as Sean said, as Pat said, just by having this conversation is freaking awesome, because it's I can't, so forgive me who of you said it, but it needs to be happening by people in groups like this, most importantly, more than people who, yes, I think people who are affected by it can have their conversations. They're not going to change anything. Yeah. End of TED Talk.
I think you're absolutely right. And the good part about people like in a group like this that are speaking about it, I feel like there's a few people in these groups that are actually, they're not just leaders amongst the group, but they're leaders in their community as well. And so for us to be confident about talking about this sort of stuff, it's just going to have a ripple-on effect. When you say about, like, we've got to look inwardly and stuff like that, you're 100% right. One thing that I was concerned about with the BLM movement was there was a stage, and I don't know if we're still in it or if they ridiculed it or whatever, when they were getting around saying, look, it's not enough to just not be racist. You need to be anti-racist. You need to come out of your home and march against this stuff. And it's like, you're forcing people to do the behaviour. You're forcing people to engage in the behaviour that you're trying to fight against. It's just encouraging it, but swinging the gate back the other way. So I really want to be careful about like talking about toxic masculinity, like how much of, and the characteristics that we speak about, how much of that is just that you are, like that particular person is an asshole, you know, like how much of it is, right, that's toxic masculinity, but that's just because he's a dick as well. So, look, I want to categorize it somehow and maybe dot point it and say, look, these things are toxically masculine and we want to end those. Those things we can talk about in another discussion. Like, we're not talking about, or whatever. We're not talking about greed or gluttony or anything like that. That's not going to come into the conversation. We need specific things which are, all right, that's toxically masculine. That's what we're dealing with at the moment.
Is that not, I know I fully understand and appreciate what you're saying, but is that the perception is going to change for every person, isn't it? And I mean, sort of, I tried to summarize in mind what does toxic masculinity mean for you, and it was expectations set by society that can be restrictive or traumatizing to any gender, was the sort of summary that I came up with, which was I feel from personal experience, and this is solely from personal experience, that my toxic masculinity, you know, whether that was hurting people physically, emotionally, whatever it was, there normally seemed to be some sort of gain, whether that was feeling good within myself, standing out in a group of, you know, saying things that you didn't quite mean just to get a reaction and a laugh, to be the joker, you know, to get a girl that you didn't really want, etc. So that is, the perception of it is always going to change, and it's really hard to summarize in bullet points, I think, of you know, what is I mean, everyone's perception is different, isn't it? So saying what is toxic masculinity, we've all got different views that, in fact, they're all virtually the same, but we're saying them in different manners. We're viewing them in slightly different manners. I don't know where I'm going with this, but I fully agree with you, but it's so hard to actually bullet point it and draw a line and say, that's that, and this is that. I don't know what your view is on that.
I think that's a awesome point, and it is, you know, all subjective and relative to the individual. But much like communication, we all communicate and interpret things in different manners. And what, you know, why I always bang back to seek to understand is my favorite quote of fucking all time, is like, if we're educated enough, you know, like speaking to, there's now 8 on the call, all of you communicate in different ways with different body language, different tonality. Some people are fucking blunt to the point, others just will go, which is awesome. But now that I'm aware of that, we can work to the situation at hand and understand, and then we can, I guess, roll the conversation off the bat of, you know, us being in the driver's seat. And what I mean by us being in the driver's seat, you're all on here because you want to continue the conversation. Right? By wanting to continue the conversation, we want to do better in our communities, which means, hey, rather than me going out and bashing my beliefs around what toxic masculinity, or what anything forever is, it's just like, okay, well, if that conversation comes up, let's understand where they're at, how they're communicating about it, what their experiences to this point have led, or their understanding, and then we can look to you know, engage in the conversation to a degree. Maybe that might have been a big tangent, but fuck.
Lockie, can I just mention something?
Sure can, Shep. How you doing, brother?
Yep, I'm well, thank you. I'm not certain whether I was on or not. There's a sociologist in the United States called Michael Kimball, and Michael undertook an study of West Point cadets, and he didn't ask it in the context of toxic masculinity, because that expression actually derives, as I understand it, from the women's study movement and women's philosophical movement of the 70s and 80s. But what he asked is of cadets a series of questions, and he asked is, what did they think was a good man? And out of that, he received a series of views, which were, there was integrity, there was honor, there was responsibility, there was being a provider, there was doing the right thing, putting others first, sacrifice, care, standing up for the little guy. But then he asked them what was a real man, and he got a completely different response. He said, a real man never cries, a real man is strong, doesn't show feelings. And I can say that I grew up in the 60s, so my father, who I loved dearly, was very reluctant to show feeling to his sons. To his daughter, it was all okay. Play through the pain, suck it up, power, aggression, win at all costs, be aggressive, get rich, get laid. But as he points out, this concept of being a real man isn't something which is internal. What we're trying to do is perform not for other people, but for other men. Masculinity, in his view, is the judging of other men by an order created in their minds. And I think the conversation should really be about trying to change that perception, that concept of that a real man is a good man. And what we've got to try to begin to shift away is some messages that have been created by mythology, by generation movement, that it is okay for a man, a real man, to not necessarily always be fantastic at sport or be great as a business leader or whatever. A real man is a person, just like anyone else. That's what I think anyway. So Michael Kimball's views on this have been, as I understand it, accepted by West Point in trying to take away some of the rigidity that exists in the military, because that is if you think about it, that is the military in the United States is the atypical real man, or they try to be.
So I think perhaps maybe what we're touching on is that it might have a bit more to do with the audience in which you're in.
Yeah.
Sorry, Sean, do you want to speak?
Oh, you can be, yeah. That's all right,
No. Yeah, so it might have a little bit to do with the audience in which you're in. So if we were to take something like assertiveness, I'm going to say over assertiveness, because assertiveness I think is a good trait, but over assertiveness. If you happen to be in a room full of, let's say, young, submissive colleagues, let's say you're in a work environment, and like tradies, so you're a leading hand tradie, and he's just completely assertive and goes, look, this is the job we need to get done, boom, 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 tells all the boys, and the boys just fall into line. Would they say that was toxic, or was that over the top masculine? Probably not. But if he happened to be in a room full of, let's say, people that were less submissive and people that knew their role already, and he came in and said, right, we're going to do blah, 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 would you say that's toxic? Well, yes, because perhaps it's got a lot to do with the audience, how the audience receives it. And maybe it's got to do with your ability to identify the audience in which you're in and gauge your assertiveness or your typically toxic masculine traits. Maybe. I'm sort of proposing this as a question while I'm asking it. What do you
personally feel a little bit of that comes down back. I think you mentioned it before. Are you toxically masculine, or are you just a dickhead? And I think if you're talking about in a workplace environment, like if you've got a male manager and you've got a group, as you said, is it a group of tradies? Are you in an office with predominantly women? Is it a mixed crowd? I feel that might be an issue about just general leadership styles, unless, of course, maybe it wouldn't be visible to an outside person, but if that person being that way because of a learned belief that the fact that they have a dick between their legs gives them the right to speak a certain way to whoever's there, and that's toxic. But if maybe they just have never really practiced the art of communication in general because they're new to the role, they're just learning, I feel there's possibly differences there, but I think it would come down to the place it came from. And I'm sure that would manifest in multiple other ways in that environment, not just at, say, a team talk or something.
Oh, yeah. Let's quickly hear from Tom, then Brad, and then we'll continue this free-flowing conversation.
Well, firstly, thanks for having us on, Locke, and nice to meet you all, guys, anyway. I think for me, there's an element of conditioning from a young age, and I think there's a construct around what a male is supposed to be like, and I think based on your experiences and based on, you know, what a male is supposed to be like, I think sometimes we move away from who we are as a person, and so we move away from that self-love, and guys are taught not to be vulnerable. They're taught not to look inside themselves. They're taught not to cry, and so I think they become innately unhappy. But so what happens is because they're unhappy and they're not delving into internally to become happy, then they look for external things to make them happy. And, you know, I jotted down some notes such as characteristics of a guy's innately unhappy, and his behaviors manifest in like the need to be right. He tries to fix rather than listen. He withdraws rather than communicates. Can often be addictive, maybe bullying behavior, unfaithful, lying, criticizing, berating, judging, all with the ability to stay in control because that external environment validates who he is. And so I think it's really important to understand that, firstly, for me, this is the journey sort of I went on. It all starts from the inside, and then your external environment is a reflection of where you are internally. And then I think on the flip side of that, a healthy version is a guy who is very mindful, he's alert, he's present, he watches objectively, he has self-mastery, self-control, he always protects his loved ones, he has integrity, keeps his word, and takes responsibility. And so I think for me, it starts with a bit of conditioning and actually loving yourself and actually being able to step back and go, that's a conditioned thought process in my body that is toxic based on my experience and based on whatever has gone on in the past. So for me to change that, I've had to try and objectively look at this behavior and what it is and recognize it as it pops up. That's my take anyway.
You're a bloody wordsmith, Tommy. What about...
Not sure about that.
Yeah, that came out very eloquently. I was like, my brain was struggling to connect two dots while I was talking, and you like sounded like you were
gracious.
You know.
Tommy, what do you reckon like needs to happen for us to, like, I know you sort of touched on identifying those behaviors and stuff.
Well, yeah, I actually think first of all it starts with education and identification of it, and whether it's these groups or whether it's people like us changing the way we parent, changing the way that our kids are educated, changing the way that we value what a man is, and so it has to start within the home, I think, and it's like it has to start with yourself. First of all, you have to sort yourself out, identify yourself, understand why you're toxic, understand how this has happened, understand what your self-talk is, what are you saying to yourself on a daily basis, do you love yourself? Because until any of that is sorted out, it's impossible for anything exterior to change, because you'll just look for other external things to validate how you feel. So it starts with an education for yourself, and then through parenting, through these groups, that you can slowly educate each other and support each other on a journey that I think is vitally important for happiness, to be honest with you.
That's awesome, mate. Brad, what about, Brad's the last one to hear from, and then we'll keep rolling with the combo. No, I can't hear you, mate. I don't think people have, yeah. Maybe try unplug your headphones. Let's awkward silence.
No. Sorry, guys.
Oh no, we got you.
Sorry. Oh, they got me.
Yeah.
Hey guys, sorry, I'm chasing kids around at the moment. The wife's still at work. I've had you guys in the background listening, and I'm just amazed. I sort of brought the subject up a little bit with Lockyer a week or so ago, and I'm thoroughly fucking confused about the whole situation, to be honest with you. But you guys have really brought some really good things up that have made me think, and that's what I've got out of it. Pat, I think I sort of chimed in when you were starting, mate, and was blown away by that. And then Daniel, likewise. And then Tom at the end there talking about educating. I've got 2 young sons, and I thoroughly agree. I think it's about education. But I've been absolutely blown away by what you guys have said, because I'm unsure what we're talking about, and what you've been talking about has really opened my eyes a little bit, because I come from a military background, and exactly what you've been talking about, and the probably the not so good parts of it was me. So yeah, that's what I've got to say at the moment, Lockie.
Awesome. I think we're all probably guilty, or so I won't speak on behalf of you guys, but I definitely know I've contributed to a lot of that stuff. But I would agree with, what most people have said. I think it's definitely a confusing fucking topic, because as Pat, you were saying, there's no like ... this is what that looks like. But obviously then even, look at anger, right? Let's say aggression's thing, like what the fuck is aggression to certain communities or environments? And I guess it's always going to be open to interpretation. That's why I think, ultimately having these conversations and having them in small groups, not like on a global scale, because while you might be able to reach 1 million people or whatever, it's not going to have the kind of conversation that, say, you even look at Brisbane, right? Like, Dan, you're over in West End, right? Like the conversation around what toxic masculinity may be completely different to where I am at Kangaroo Point as opposed to Newstead. Like there's all these micro hubs, right? And ultimately I think I would love to see it if it got to a point where, people are having these all over the place and, them putting it on a place on social media. Because for me, it's a daunting thing to have that conversation in a public forum, because a lot of people aren't open to understanding. It's just like, fuck you, I'm going to rip you apart. And that sort of holds a lot of people back who have, great opinions and perspectives, which I think is very important to be able to get those people with their voices out there. Does anyone else have anything that you feel would be valuable sharing around that from experiences or anything like that? Yeah, Sean?
Yeah, I've just been taking notes from what everyone's been saying. And I mean, Lockie and I talk about this stuff, and I'm deep thinker in this. And even what you were saying with public forums, hey, little man. I was on a podcast on Saturdays with a chick that does like mindful stuff, and we spoke about toxic masculinity, and I was talking very much about this, and all was in the back of my mind was because she's got a heavy female podcast, and likely she brought up kind of like, the toxic feminist stuff, and because I'm just like, this can really go out of hands if it's just an opinion rather than a discussion, because people can interpret it differently. From the notes, I've seen a common theme that I'll quickly add is where I look at it as a whole, and we've spoken about generations, and what I think, I come from a footy background, so the footy club I went to was toxic as fuck. Like, I'm like, but I didn't have a dad growing up, so that's where I learned a lot of the shit. I look at it from as a generation and then kind of like a generation. We've spoken about what toxic is, and some of the things that were examples were external. Toxic is, your aggression. Toxic is doing stuff and kind of external values, whereas then wholesome is internal values. And that's where, all these, you guys are amazing blokes on here, and you talk about we need to work on our internal stuff. Part of my theory is that that's where we're getting it wrong, or we got it wrong, because my granddad is amazing, but he's humble as fuck, right? Whereas my dad wasn't, and he was just as arrogant as fuck. And me growing up and seeing all these people at the footy club who are toxic but vocal, versus then not getting any exposure to people that were awesome but internal and humble, that created that culture. And I think what Stafford Shepherd was talking about was the toxic ones, that's what they value. Drinking lots, being the dickhead type thing. And they'll vocalize that and impression that on the next generation, whereas the humble guy doesn't. Whereas I think what we needed, internal work, which is what we're doing, is great, but these forums and being proud of being more wholesome. And I'm loving seeing, like on the AFL with the players with their kids at in the grand final cup, stuff like that. Brad, the fact that you're on this call from the army, but you're at home raising your kids while your wife's at work, mate, that's the shit that you need to be proud of around your army guys, because that's going to have more of an impact. So that's kind of just my way I've kind of read the conversations as to, we should all have more of them, but be proud of being wholesome and be that impression versus the toxic fuckers. So
dive in, George. Great share, Sean.
Great question out there. What does the group think? Is it getting better in generation, or is it getting worse?
I would vote better.
Yeah, I think it's getting better.
Yeah.
Mm.
Do you think it's better because our own perceptions are changing? So our environment that we see daily is improving. Like how are we judging that? Like, because I've been thinking about this a lot, and certainly in the last 5 years of my life, like toxic masculinity, it's still been there at times. You know, sometimes it's a default mechanism, isn't it, where it's easier to switch back to. So because it's improving in your own life and you're not seeing it so much, does that mean it's improving sort of worldwide, or is it just our perception?
You know, I say this. I don't think it is improving worldwide. Mainly because every culture has a different perception of what masculinity is. So, if we were dealing with Afghanistan, I was looking at a BBC report the other day, where women, for the first time in one small province, have been given the legal entitlement to have their name on their child's birth certificate. Now, where that, but we look at our, we've got to be very careful, because Western and Eastern and Asiatic values are different. So every country, every culture will have a different approach. I do think it's improving. As I recall, as I said, my dad used to say that boys don't cry. We have to do certain things. He was a wonderful man. There's no doubt about that in my mind. But I was very lucky. I grew up in a culture of women too. I had strong aunts who encouraged an understanding of the whole of life. So I think things are changing, but I think they're not changing worldwide. There are huge differences throughout this one village.
100%.
A couple of things, and one thing that stuck out to me, I think I mentioned it before, was some of how the way people spoke and responded to that first post and talked about, well, my ex-wife was a bitch, or this was that, or whatever. And I could feel the hurt there. And then I reflected on my own response, because I'm a gay guy, right? So I've got my own views on the way that I've been treated in my life and the way I've been made to feel less masculine. Or I identified in myself that I felt like I seemed less masculine than the men around me when I was a kid, even though I was playing AFL and basketball and karate and everything. But I always had this feeling, because there was no role models to look up to in that sense. And so I found myself having a bit of an emotional response to that post as well. And I realized I too was feeling hurt, or elements of hurt, reading it, just like all the other guys, in a way, not everyone, but a lot of people. And then I look around, when you say it was improved, my husband and I got married earlier this year, and Lockie was there, and it really dawned on me when we had the ceremony and I gave my speech. I look around the room, and men of big burly men, married men with kids and grandkids, came up and were like crying through that ceremony. And so I've never thought this would touch me or affect me so much. And I'm really lucky that I'm surrounded by heterosexual role models who are dads, who have got kids, who, for example, when they hug me, and this is something I'd be interested to know how all of you do, is when you hug a mate, gay, straight, or whatever, but hug another man, how many times do you pat each other on the back as you hug? It's almost like as if every pat signifies, I'm a real man, I'm a real man, I'm a real man. It's like two men who are straight can't just hug and just hold it for 3 seconds without the need for both of them to like pat the shit out of each other's back, as if it's like, yeah, blokes, pat, pat, pat. And so I sort of started encouraging some of my straight mates. I said, dude, you have to fucking pat my back. Like, pat my back if I do something good in life, and I want a pat on the back. And then it sort of like has ripple affected, and it was just like, I don't know. I think there's glorious things about being a man, no matter who you're attracted to. And I do think Western culture-wise, at least Australia, things are improving. I definitely, as Stafford said, like, yeah, birth certificates. Saudi Arabia, women can just now drive. Like, I mean, we have a long way to go globally, but I feel like in our own backyard, looking in there's a lot of positives to take forward from this chat.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that, mate. That's a cool thing that probably I've never really thought about. And it probably even it's funny, right? Like, I remember, it was six years ago when I first sort of started getting into personal development. And the first time I kissed a dude on the cheek, right? I lived in France, and that's the fucking norm. Like, you don't question that shit here. But when I kissed a dude on the cheek here in Australia, I was like, fuck, man, sorry. Didn't mean to do that. And I still do it from time. Like, I still kiss fucking everyone on the cheek. I fucking love it. And I still have to, sometimes I feel like I need to justify myself because I'm like, fuck. But then I'm like, oh, look at Tommy. He's had a few kisses.
When you greeted me at your engagement, at Amy's birthday, you came up and you almost kissed me on the cheek, and then you pulled back and you were like, I think you had this moment of like, wait, hang on, was I supposed to do that? I'm not sure.
Well,
I could sense it in that second.
To get a lock.
Yeah, well, exactly. That's what I mean, bro. We've shared beds multiple times. This is the thing, though. I still probably subconsciously, as much as I don't, or say I don't give a fuck, subconsciously like, whoop, what's someone going to think? Whereas for me, it's like, I don't pat people's backs. I fucking love a good hug, and I always kiss my mates on the cheek because I think that's one thing. Except for you, Brad, you haven't got one yet, mate. You'll get one soon. But it's funny you say that, Dan, because I remember that, and I do it all the time. But there's just subtle things, and it's like, well, in Europe, it's fine. You do it 3 times, but here, it's frowned upon. And going back to what Shep was, or I can't remember who was saying it around, is it changing? Like, I even look at it from the men's circles, right? I've run them in multiple suburbs, right, where I grew up. Run one at Kangaroo Point, run one at Newstead. Newstead's an affluent area, right? So when I went in there, it was breezy, right? Everyone was open to the idea of sharing what's going on and listening and understanding and not arguing, but just supporting each other. When I went back to Toowoomba, Tommy, you were at that first one. It was fucking wild, mate. Remember that? There was one guy who walked in who just blew my mind, and it just put things into perspective that there's so much work that still needs to be done. But the fact that guy, for example, and Tommy, you probably remember the guy, like the fact that he showed up signifies that we're making changes, which is incredible. And I think,
can I say?
Oh, sorry, you go, Shep.
No, I was going to say, I think it's generational too. You guys are, I'm nearly 60, right? My generation are still very hesitant to hug each other. Now, I'm not talking about on the sporting field. I am actually talking about in issues. So I sat around a committee meeting last Tuesday, and I would say that my age, generally, I couldn't imagine any of us hugging. All right? Now, that's not meaning that I don't think we should hug. I just can't imagine us doing it. And what's so great about the generational shifts have been that as our concept of humanity is changing amongst us, the younger people can accept and embrace it. I can give you this story, and this is wonderful. I employed a young man now nearly 2.5 years ago. He was the best lad for that job. There is no doubt about it. Great skills, wonderful. But he told us right at the beginning of his interview that he was gay. And that was a really tough thing for a young man to say in a profession, my profession, which is still very, whatever you may think, masculine dominated, although it's changing. And this year, 2 weeks ago, he sends me a text on a Sunday night to say that he's engaged. I just think that's wonderful. I also think that he is the future in many ways, because he is comfortable with himself. He understands society. He really is. Of my clerks, I want 3 of them to be the next judges, and he's one of them. Absolutely. But he shows from the heart, excuse me, that things are changing. Things are changing. And they are. They're changing for the best. Don't get me wrong. But there's a lot out there that are static. You only need to look at the United States reaction. The reason Donald Trump still has so much support in the United States is that there is a reaction to the changes that have taken place over the last 20 years, not just economic, but social, personal, and life. And the issues are the issues are still there. I actually think the word toxic is not right. I think Michael Kimball's got it right. It's a question about the perception of a good and real man. And what we've got to change is the fact that a real man is a good man. That's the only thing.
Yeah. Something I'd like to add, I was having a chat with my dad. My dad's actually, I got lucky with, as far as fathers go. My dad's the best bloke I've ever met in my life. Really humble guy. He's got his flaws, obviously, and they're pretty funny, but he's a good guy. And we were having a chat one day, and Mum was talking about a gay guy that she knew from work. Mum worked at the tax office, so she'd worked with a whole bunch of people. One of the guys happened to be gay, and we were talking about it. And I think, because Dad said he had a hard time knowing that Mum had a gay friend. And when I started to conceptualise why that was, and I said, what was your problem? Like, what has it got to do with your interpretation of whether that guy's a good person or whether he's not, whoever he sleeps with? And he said, we got to understand, in our day and age, we didn't understand very much about gay people. And when we thought that someone said the term gay was synonymous to us for predators. He said, back in the day, we thought gay meant pedophile, and so we thought they were all the same thing. Now that we've gone a lot longer down the track, we've realised gay does not mean pedophile, and it's actually something completely different. He's like, I'm okay with it, So I think as we go down the line, there's understanding and things like that that are just that's going to happen as time goes on. I was watching another TED talk one time. It was really good about why one generation would be smarter than the other. And the professor looked right into it, and he said that each later generation has a greater ability to look at the hypotheticals, whereas the generation before has less of an ability. And he did tests like 2 is to 4 as square is to rectangle. And it's just, there was things like that about interpreting hypotheticals and testing each generation on that. And he said, yeah, well, this generation is very good at interpreting the hypotheticals, but the last generation is very good at knowing that the Middle East has been invaded like 7 times and it's failed 6 of them. And we're on the 7th at the moment, So there's a difference. But yeah, I think as we go along, naturally the human race will progress. I think it's got to do a lot with understanding and conceptualizing things that we thought before are actually not true.
Sorry, Sean, you go.
Just one quick. One of the things that I reflect on the generations thing that I think when you say, what can we do more of going forward is that unfortunately sometimes Pat, that guy that you talk, or your dad, sorry, because my dad changed from being an absolute F-word of a boss to one of the most nicest guy I know, but is we need to look at your dad, and if he says those comments, and that may hurt the gay community, it may hurt other people, it may hurt people that are offended by it, we still need to look at him with empathy, because he didn't grow up doing that. He was conditioned into it. And if you give him empathy and the ability to acknowledge and the space and the time to kind of go and realize that he's wrong, versus if you tell him, no, you're rah, 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 he's more likely to just stick his foot in. So I think, a way to say that going forward is anyone that's been conditioned and victims of the cultures that we're talking about, they should be looked at with empathy. And yeah, that's sorry, go Daniel.
Yeah, no, it's been on my mind a lot, and I keep coming back to Pat. I don't know, Pat, if you were the person that commented that, and I'm trying to look on Facebook for the thread, because I can't remember who said it. But the person who said it spoke about cisgender, and so did you. So I don't know if it was the same person or the same comment, but that a white hetero male is now made to feel less woke or less of a seat at the table or something like that.
That's what's causing problems in the US.
Yeah, and I just kind of think to that, this isn't a chat about sexuality, but to that end, I feel like there's a lot of hurt between men and women, the pain they can inflict, and then being so confused about what the frick is acceptable and how the hell am I supposed to act? You know what I mean? It's so confusing, the messages that I get. You know, 1 minute I'm told I'm a freaking asshole just because I'm a man, and the next minute, like, it's, you know, where do you find that balance between owning your masculinity and not being an asshole, and trying to get better, and then realizing that some of the people who you're around have been hurt in the past by other men just like you, but not you personally, and therefore you're kind of bearing the brunt of the pain that other men have inflicted on women and stuff. And what I'd say is a step that I think could work is around sexuality, and that is that as a guy, I'm also a man. I'm also exploring my masculinity, and so if I know that when I look around and other men have my back and we're encouraging each other, and as a straight man, I don't feel like I'm being thought of less at, not because I'm gay, but because of it. Even though you say, I'm cool with you, yeah, mate, you're a great guy, whatever. But if there's still that niggling belief deep down that you see a guy who's a tradie or a guy who's wearing a pair of glitter shorts at Mardi Gras, that one is more of a man than the other, then this conversation won't actually ever move forward, because we're all men and we all express that differently. And I feel if men can get it right with each other, you've got a much better chance with women.
That's right. You bring up a
100%.
good point. I mean, I grew up in Sydney, so I've got a lot of understanding about the gay community. I had plenty of influence by that. And I think that's a good question. Can a gay person be masculine? That's a good thing to bring up, because of course they can, you know. So for us to say they've got feminine traits and blah, 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 well, that's not what makes them gay, you know. They have every ability to be just as masculine as everybody else.
So in addition to that, I think it's dangerous to do it and the opposite way. I'm in a group on Thursday nights, and we literally had this exact same discussion last Thursday night, because of the topic was diversity and inclusion, so different to the topic today. But and one of the guys said, "Look, you guys, you're all straight guys." Like, and it was a new one to think. I'm like, actually, this guy that you've been speaking to for the last 20 minutes is gay, and he's like, "Oh, I didn't realize." I'm like, "Yeah, because we don't focus on that." And to the point that also you were mentioning, Daniel, about kind of like, you know, you're expected to be more feminine, or you felt more feminine, and you're doing masculinity. I grew up with a mum and an older sister, and was around, you know, Grease, Dirty Dancing, everything like that. My mum and my sister are both hairdressers, so I grew up in a hairdressing salon and stuff like that, and then played footy. And that was where I was like, well, I was told that I had to be all masculine. And my thing is exactly what you, Pat, was saying about if we can be, we need to be comfortable that gays can be masculine, and they are, because if it's irrelevant. But then also straight can be more feminine because of.
No, he's frozen on a really good point.
I think you dropped out, Sean. I think you're disconnected.
He was just about to nail it as well.
Yeah, I was waiting
bring
for
it
that. Oh, man, that sucks. I think for me, it comes back to, again, classifying these terms that we're using. Everyone throws around toxic masculinity. I want to break it down also. What is toxicity? And to me, I think toxicity, so if something's toxic, it denotes that it can be detoxified. And so if you think about any behaviour that should be detoxified, if you're talking about something that's intellectual, then the only way that you can detoxify something that's been learned behaviour that's intellectual is with knowledge. And so anything to me now that can be detoxed with knowledge and understanding, I'm going to classify as toxic. And I guess anything that needs to be detoxed, I'm going to classify as toxic. And for the masculinity part, I think actually what we're, after this discussion, because I'll be honest, coming into this, I thought toxic masculinity was a bullshit term used by feminists that was like the hammer that they just swung at everything. Oh, a man said something, that's toxically masculine. Like, whatever the point was, everyone just swung the hammer around and said, oh, this man's just leading, and it's not because he's a good leader, it's because he's got a penis, and so let's call him toxically masculine, and then everyone will get on board. It was like a catch cry. But now that I've sort of, I don't know, discussed and had a little bit of thought about it, I think what we're actually talking about is not toxic masculinity, it's toxic misinterpreted masculinity. So it's toxic because it needs to be detoxified, and you can do that by, as I said, by understanding. And it's misinterpreted masculinity because it's what that person would interpret as masculinity. We only interpret it as not masculine or as an issue because they've misinterpreted it. So for me, that's how I'm going to term it from now on, is toxic misinterpreted masculinity.
Lockie missing all these gems.
Yeah, you'll get it when it records.
Sean, you're in the middle of this awesome point, and we're all like on the edge of our seat waiting for your
conclusion. Yeah.
And then it just froze. You froze in this awkward spot, and then
I was like talking, and I'm like, no one's looking. I'm like, everyone's freezing. They're either really interested or my shins are back to fuck it up.
You look back on the recording and you'll see us all going.
You said mum's a hairdresser. I grew up in a hairdresser. Then you went somewhere else, and then you paused.
Yeah. So, and with that, and that's where I was touching on Pat's. Sorry, Stuart. Lockie, we're not talking about toxic masculinity.
Oh, no.
Not again. No.
I'll quickly wrap it up so then I can stop recording. And sorry, guys, I had to
no, sorry.
run my cash money for my ring down to a mate. But good. But yeah, thank you guys. And Sean, we'll carry on with the conversation. I'll just wrap this recording for the podcast up. And
that's cool.
But I appreciate all of you guys, and like I got a lot of respect for you guys for actually jumping on here and for feeling comfortable sharing your opinions and engaging in what I've thought to be an incredible conversation. I've learned a lot. I've taken, much like Sean, I took a fucking ton of notes, which I'll post sort of my perspective when I post this in the Man That Can Project Facebook group. But always love having conversations like this. So if there's any other cool topics that you guys want to discuss openly, like let's get more of this happening. I think it's hugely beneficial, and we can all learn more stuff. So thank you guys for jumping on and giving up your time.